When a traveling salesman suspects that his beautiful wife might be plotting against him, he decides to uncover the truth behind her first husband's mysterious death. One afternoon, Etienne wakes up in bed, checks the time on the clamshell clock on the bedside table, and sees that it's 3:50 p.m. After sitting up, he rubs his throat, grabs the empty glass near the bed, and heads to the kitchen for water. In the corner of the room is a winding iron staircase leading to the printing shop below. At the counter, Etienne's beautiful wife, Louise, warmly welcomes a customer and informs him that his order's ready. The customer thanks the woman and she instructs Charles, an employee, to carry the man's packages to his car. Moments later, Etienne peeks down to the shop before grabbing a book from the shelf and intentionally dropping it on the floor. His wife hears the thud, so the concerned woman looks up onto the upper landing and asks her husband if he's alright. The man answers that he's feeling better, and he plans on reading Madame Bovary to pass the time. Then, he opens a book and writes down today's date, February 21, 1963, on a blank piece of paper. He logs that he had a stomachache at 2:25 p.m. that lasted 30 minutes until he finally fell asleep at 2:55 p.m. The next day, in Dr. Dewer's clinic, the physician reads Etienne's notes and learns that he woke up sweating profusely at 3:50 p.m. The patient states that he had lamb cutlets, mashed potatoes, and an orange for lunch. Then, the doctor asks who prepares his meals, and he says that their maid, Rose, does all the cooking because his wife is busy running the shop. Dr. Dewer wonders if Louise had the same meal, and Etienne says that she didn't eat the mash because she doesn't like potatoes. The physician asks if he also works in the shop, and he explains that he's a traveling salesman. The patient adds that his wife took over the business from her father while he canvasses for customers. When the doctor asks if he always eats lunch at home, the man says yes unless he's in a different part of the city. Moments later, Dr. Dewer instructs the patient to take off his jacket and tie so he can examine him. Etienne shares that his stomach pain started several weeks ago, prompting him to keep a written record of everything he's eaten since. So the physician asks if he's ever fainted before, and the man confides that he had a spell on December 1st. He explains that he remembers the exact date because it was also the same night he had his first stomachache. However, the doctor he consulted at the time said it was just indigestion and told him to drink mineral water. Aside from the stomach pain, Etienne says he also experiences dizziness, nausea, and a burning sensation in his throat. The patient adds that including December 1st, he's had 6 or 7 more fits, usually 1 or 2 weeks between each one. When Dr. Dewer asks if his wife recommended him, he confides that Louise doesn't know he's at a clinic. After the consultation, the man calls his spouse and lies that he was at a client's house. That evening, the couple hosts dinner at their place for their married friends Mariette and Arthur. The female guest compliments the food, so Louise says Rose is a great cook, unlike their previous maid, Charlotte. Then, Etienne mentions that at least he never got sick when Charlotte made their meals. When the guests wonder what he's talking about, the wife explains the man had indigestion last winter, prompting him to remind her that he just had another fit yesterday. However, she and their friends brush off his worries and assure him that it's likely nothing serious. Later, Etienne looks out the window and watches the people on the carousel by their building. Years ago, the man entered the printing shop and introduced himself to the owner, Mr. Birard. He explained that he's there for the salesman position, so the older man called his employees Charles and Theo and introduced them to their new co-worker. Moments later, Mr. Birard's daughter, Louise, descended the spiral staircase and she and Etienne were immediately smitten with each other. However, to his disappointment, he learns that the woman's married to a history teacher. Eventually, the pair began a passionate affair and secretly made love in seedy hotel rooms. After the deed, Louise told Etienne that she wished they'd met 4 years ago so she didn't have to marry Guillaume. In the present, the wife removes her robe to reveal the skimpy lingerie underneath. Then she calls her husband to bed so they can make love. Minutes later, the man wonders if she loves him the same way she loved her first husband. Louise says she doesn't want to talk about it, so Etienne points out how they've never discussed Guillaume's death. He asks if the man died from an illness, and the wife says he had a heart attack. Then, the woman assures that she loves him even though she doesn't know if it's in the same way she did her first husband. The next day, the jolly Etienne eats breakfast in the kitchen and tells the flirtatious Rose that he'll be having lunch at home. So the maid says she'll prepare oven-baked potatoes for him and leftover stuffed cabbage for his wife. When he asks if Louise is at the shop, Rose says she left before 10 a.m. to go to her new dressmaker. Later, the woman returns to the shop and answers a call from Mariette. She thanks the friend for recommending the dressmaker, whom she says is talented but takes her time with a client. During lunch, Louise asks her husband how his food is, and he says the oven-baked potatoes taste great. Then, they try recalling the name of the maid they had before Guillaume died. The woman claims she doesn't know, but Etienne finally remembers that it was Marie. Moments later, the man inquires about her dressmaker, and the wife explains that Mariette recommended a new one. He asks where the dressmaker shop's located, but Louise gives a vague description and just says it's near the park. That afternoon, while speaking to a potential client, the visibly pale and nauseous Etienne tries to keep his composure. Then, he excuses himself to the bathroom where he throws up. The client asks if he's alright, so the man says yes and reasons that it was probably due to something he ate. Later, he heads to Dr. Dewer's clinic where he presents the unfortunate theory that he might be getting poisoned with arsenic, the same substance ingested by a character in Madame Bovary. The patient explains that he never gets sick when he eats at a restaurant, and all the instances he felt ill happened hours after eating a meal at home. Then, Etienne tells the physician that he'd like him to run blood and urine tests to check if he has the substance in his system. While preparing to draw his blood, Dr. Dewer wonders why he believes it's arsenic. So the man says he read multiple articles on the subject. So the physician suggests he note any changes to his weight in the following days. Eventually, he returns to the shop where he sees his wife ending a call just as he walks in. He asks who she was talking to, and she says it was her new friend, Françoise. In the movie theater, the pair curiously watch Rose kissing her boyfriend in the row in front of them. The sight excites Louise, who places her hand on her husband's thigh and massages it. When they return home, they passionately make love in the bedroom. After the deed, Etienne tells his wife to invite her new friend Françoise over for dinner since the only people they ever hang out with are Mariette and Arthur. Louise reasons that the friend doesn't go out much, but when he keeps pestering her, she says she'll think about it. During the next weekly dinner with their friends, the others notice that the man hasn't touched his food, so he says he doesn't want to risk upsetting his stomach with a seafood dish. Concerned, the women offer to cook him an omelet, so they head to the kitchen. While the men are alone at the dining table, Etienne asks Arthur for a favor. He says he's planning a surprise for his wife's birthday and he'd like their old maid Marie to be in attendance. Since Arthur works at the ID card issuing services, he thinks he'll be able to find the woman. Even though he doesn't fully understand Etienne's plan, the guest says he'll see what he can do. In the kitchen, the women mischievously giggle while talking about their new dressmaker. Days later, the salesman chooses to have breakfast at a cafe. Then he heads to the clinic for the test results. Dr. Dewer tells him small traces of arsenic can be found in all living organisms, and the amount they found in his samples wasn't significant. However, Etienne mentions that he continues losing weight, so the physician suggests doing more tests, but that the sample needs to be taken 1 hour after ingesting the poison. One morning, the salesman notices his pants getting looser around his waist. Suddenly, his wife enters the room and says she'll have coffee with Mariette before going to the dressmaker. When the woman leaves, Etienne goes to the kitchen, takes Rose in his arms, and kisses her on the lips. Seconds later, the man pulls away from the maid and apologizes for leading her on. He returns to the bedroom and remorsefully cries while holding a framed picture of his wife. Years ago, after Etienne and Louise made love in a hotel room, he wondered why she wanted to meet on a Thursday, which wasn't their usual schedule. So the woman despondently shared that her husband's been ill for a few days and doctors can't figure out what it is. When the salesman swore that he loved her, she said she'd never let him leave. Soon, Etienne tracks down Marie, who says she remembers Guillaume's final days. The older woman recalls that the man had lost so much weight due to the mysterious illness that his body resembled that of a boy's. Eventually, he stopped eating because he kept throwing up, and not even Louise cooking his favorite dishes could restore his appetite. Then, Marie shows the salesman a picture of healthy Guillaume, and Etienne asks if he can keep it. That evening, he stops by a pharmacy to use a weighing scale and learns that he's down to 160 pounds. The next morning, Louise says she brought his favorite bread, but the look on the man's face implies that he is wary of any food inside the house. Seconds later, the woman says she needs to go because she has a scheduled delivery. After she leaves, Etienne thanks Rose for not telling his wife about them kissing. He adds that he didn't mean to disrespect her and emphasizes that he loves Louise. The maid takes a seat and mentions how he saw her kissing her boyfriend in the movie theater. He affirms and says that they looked like they loved each other, which is what's important. Rose asks why he hasn't touched the bread, so to avoid suspicion, he eats it with some jam. As he experiences the same symptoms, he quickly drives to Dr. Dewer's clinic. The physician extracts the blood from the patient's arm and says he can come by tomorrow for the results. As a precaution, the doctor tells Etienne not to eat anything at home and fake an illness to explain his loss of appetite. Before concluding the consultation, the salesman wonders if it's that easy to acquire arsenic, and Dr. Dewer says yes. When he returns home, he lies to his wife and says that he might have the flu. Hours later, Louise climbs up the stairs to check on Etienne. When she offers to get him more water and some food, the man says he'll ask Rose to buy bottled water later and adds that he isn't hungry. After the woman returns downstairs, the salesman overhears her on the phone sadly telling someone that she can't meet up today because she's busy at the store. When he asks who it was, she says it was Mariette. Etienne remembers calling the shop from a phone booth just so he could talk to Louise. He recalls her referring to him with a woman's name so Guillaume and the other employees wouldn't suspect anything. When he wakes up from a nap, he sends the maid to the store to buy bottled water. Then, he calls for his wife by the staircase, but an employee informs him that she went to the post office. Now that he's all alone, the salesman sneaks into the kitchen to check the cupboards for the poison. Next, he heads to the bathroom to rifle through the medicine cabinet. Suddenly, Louise appears, so he lies and says he was looking for some aspirin. The next day, Dr. Dewer delivers the unfortunate news that the blood test showed he'd ingested a high dosage of arsenic, an amount that, if repeatedly taken, could eventually kill him. So Etienne tells the physician that he believes his wife is poisoning him just as she did her first husband. He confides that the woman killed Guillaume because she decided she'd rather be with a salesman. However, he thinks what happened to her first husband is happening to him. The man cites the numerous phone calls at work which he believes are from her new lover, hence why Louise wants to get rid of him. Etienne wonders if Guillaume knew what the woman was doing to him and if he allowed it to happen because of how much he loved her. The doctor says he's obligated to call the police, but because he doesn't want his wife to get in trouble, the salesman swears he'll tell the cops he poisoned himself and that he only went to the clinic to check if it was working. During the next dinner with their friends, Etienne eats the home-cooked meal. The guests ask if he's seen a doctor regarding his condition, but he says he hasn't because he's decided that he wants to live. His statement momentarily stuns the two women, and when she sees her husband scarf down the food, Louise tells him to slow down. Then, the woman says she can't join Mariette and Arthur tomorrow because she has to go to the dressmaker. Etienne calmly says she can always cancel because a new dress isn't that urgent, prompting the annoyed wife to storm off into the kitchen. Mariette chases after her friend, and after a few minutes, they return to the dining table claiming the matter's been resolved. The next day, the man sees the same type of bread on the table, so he tells his wife that he's skipping breakfast and he won't be home for lunch because he's meeting a new client. That afternoon, Etienne spies on Louise from his car and sees her hailing a cab. Eventually, he sees the woman enter a hotel, further proving his suspicions that she's having an affair. While the lonely salesman sits on a bench, he remembers the multiple times they secretly met up in hotel rooms to make love. Hours later, he sees Louise and her youthful lover, Olivier, exit the building. Then, they share a kiss just before the woman gets in the cab. Distraught, the salesman drinks his sorrows away at a bar. Soon, he drunkenly stumbles back to the shop, so his wife helps him up the stairs. That night, the woman gets up from bed, opens the windows to let the cool air in, and looks at the carousel below. The next day, Etienne descends the stairs to the shop. To his surprise, he sees Louise standing next to her lover. He asks his wife who he is, so Theo introduces the man as his son who's studying to become a doctor. Overwhelmed with the unexpected events, the salesman says he's meeting a client and immediately leaves. Later, Etienne enters a gun store to purchase a revolver, which he then places in the front pocket of his bag. That evening, the salesman invites the employees out for a drink, leaving Louise all alone in the shop. At the bar, he asks Theo about his son, and the man shares that he's currently staying in a hotel near his college. In the kitchen, the woman takes a small bottle from her apron pocket and considers pouring the contents into a bowl of beaten eggs, revealing that her husband's suspicions were correct. However, she ultimately decides against it, and she smirks as she places the bottle back in her pocket. Later that night, Louise shows her husband the lingerie under her robe, but he indifferently says she might catch a cold. Then, Etienne sits on the edge of the bed and asks if he's suffering from the same illness Guillaume had. So Louise quickly corrects him and says her first husband had a heart condition. He wonders if the man was happy as he lay in the same bed during his final days. However, he immediately answers his own question by stating that he probably was because he got to see Louise's beautiful face every time she ascended the stairs. Eventually, Etienne asks his wife for forgiveness, and when she wonders what for, he says he's sorry for loving her the way that he does. The next day, as the salesman heads down to the shop, the phone rings. Louise answers the call and tells her husband that it's Francoise. Even though he knows it's her lover on the other end, Etienne suppresses his emotions and calmly leaves. Later, the man drives to the hotel and loads the bullets into the revolver. Then, he enters the building and asks the woman at the front desk about Olivier. She confirms that he's a resident, but adds that he's never home before 9 p.m. on Wednesdays. Etienne asks the woman if the student lives alone, but she refuses to answer the indiscreet question. That night, a few minutes before 9 p.m., the salesman gets out of his car and waits by the hotel entrance. When Olivier finally arrives, Etienne walks toward him, his right hand ready to pull out the revolver from the coat pocket. However, as he stands face to face with his wife's lover, he realizes that killing him won't solve his problems and magically fix his complicated marriage. Perplexed, Olivier asks the salesman what he's doing in his part of the city, so Etienne lies and says he was just passing by. The next morning at 5 a.m., Louise descends the iron staircase to the shop. Then, she calls the police to report that her husband didn't come home last night. Unbeknownst to the woman, Etienne sits lifeless on a park bench, riddled with the guilt of almost taking another man's life, and having accepted that he'll always prioritize Louise's happiness over his own, the salesman shot himself in the chest with a revolver. The man's tragic and selfless act simultaneously assures that the woman he loves gets what she wants while he sets himself free from a life of mental anguish and suffering.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.